Hi everybody out in internet land. My name is Fred, aka DJ Fred, aka Nexus 6 for the old school people out there. Today we're going to be doing a video about turntables, specifically the trusty 1200 SL-1200 Technics deck. We did a video a couple years ago about how to self-ground your turntable, and I also explained a few things about the turntable and maintenance and things like that. So today we're going to do a modification of your turntable, well, maintenance and modification. What we're going to do is we are going to show you how to replace this, which is your pitch fader. This controls the speed of the platter, also known as the pitch. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove the old one, and we're going to put in some new ones, and we're also going to modify the turntable, and I'll explain why as we're going along. But basically we're going to take your MKII turntable and we're going to modify it so that it has the same pitch characteristics as an MK5 or MK3 or the LTD. Any of them that have the center pitch disabled via a button, but on our modification we won't have a button, so it's a permanent modification. Not irreversible, mind you, but definitely worth doing, and I'll explain why as we go along. So what we have here is the old pitch fader, which I already took out of one deck. It's a 20K Alps 100mm fader. Yeah, and this basically is the heart and soul of your turntable. So what we have here is the new faders, which we ordered, and these ones don't actually have the infamous ball click in the middle. If you listen carefully, you hear that sound? That's the sound of frustration, people. So here is the new fader, and it does not have that click. But that does not mean that it won't still reset, meaning the green light that goes on when you have your pitch slider in the center. What that does is it locks your turntable at exactly 33 1/3 RPM or 45, whichever speed you have it going at. So what we're going to do today is we're going to eliminate that center circuit. So basically your turntable will in essence have no perfect 0 point, although you can probably still get pretty close to it. But the idea being is that when you're mixing, that you don't lose any pitch resolution, because well, I'll explain that as we go along. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take apart this turntable. So this is an SL-1200 MK2, which is the first version of the Pro version of this turntable. So we'll just look at some stuff we got going on here. So you're going to have to remove a few things before you actually get inside this. The first thing that you're probably going to have to do is start taking away parts that might fly off when we start flipping it upside down and whatnot. So this is your counterweight. Get yourself one of these because it's a little bucket. You can put parts in it, screws, things like that. You'll thank me when you don't lose anything. This is a slip mat. We can just toss that over yonder. This is the platter. And on some turntables, this is hard to remove. Some of them it isn't. I haven't actually touched this one since I acquired this turntable, so I'm not quite sure if it's going to fly off or not, but it does. Sometimes what you can do is if you're having trouble getting this off, if it won't pop up, there's a little bit of give on this. You can see that. And if you pull it up, you can just tap it with your finger or the end of a screwdriver, and it will come right off. This is the magnet. Don't mess with this. When you're repairing your turntable or storing it or doing something with it, put it out of the way so that it doesn't get knocked or whatever. These are very delicate and are very easy to crack. So I'm just going to put mine out of the way. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is remove a few other parts. If you're going to be working on electronics, go out and buy yourself a really good jeweler's screwdriver set. I think, I'm not sure what this one cost because I actually got it as a gift, but I think a set like that costs about $15. So sometimes these little pitch knobs are hard to get off. On the other turntable I did, it was a little hard, so I just put my screwdriver under it and pulled it off. Don't lose this. This is a little piece of felt that basically glides along your pitch, and it actually helps prevent dust from getting into your slider. So you want to keep that. Take your cartridge off and store it in a place that it's not going to get knocked around, because needles are expensive. Actually, I'm going to leave that on. Okay. Now we have to remove this, because in order to get the pitch fader out, there's some wires that are attached to the circuit board. So I have to get the appropriate size screwdriver, and always use the appropriate sized bit when you're going to take something apart, because if you start stripping screws and wrecking hardware, your equipment's not going to go together the same way that it did, and you're going to be kicking yourself. So while we're here, anytime you see extra screws somewhere, like say on this motor here, this is actually the main bearing, just check them and make sure that they're tight, because they can come loose over time and affect the performance. So always make sure they're tight every time you have your platter off, which hopefully shouldn't be that often. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing screws, and some of these are torqued in there pretty good, so you might have to lean in on them a little bit. But what this plastic cover does is it prevents, well, mostly prevents fingers from getting into the main circuit board, so that you don't get a shock. But it's also supposed to prevent a lot of dust from getting into your turntable. Although this one's quite dusty. I don't think this one's been opened since it's been in a dark room. Okay, so once I have all of my screws taken off, put them in my handy bucket. Now we're going to take, oh, I don't have all of the screws. There's one that got away. Okay. So what we have here is your plastic cover, which I'll just put with the platter, because that's a good place to store it. Okay, so this is your main board. So this controls the motor. This is your motor, I guess governor, I don't know what you call it. This controls how fast the motor actually turns, and it's the drive circuit is what this is. And this is actually where the quartz lock is. So you can thank Technics for this thing, because no other turntable has one. So what we're going to be looking at doing here, this has to come off. Most of the time they don't snap on, they just kind of push on. Although the newer models you're going to see have a little white one, and it has two little tabs that you kind of have to pull away. But this one we just jiggle and it comes right off, so just like that. And it's pretty hard to mess the orientation up with this, because there's 3 holes on one side and 1 hole on the other, and as you can see there's 3 pins there and 1 on the other side. If you want to get a close-up of that, as you can see, 3 and 1. So when you go to put this back on, you just slide it in there. Okay, so these we will also be exploring. This is your pitch range here. So this controls how much range this slider actually goes to. So if we turn this all the way, instead of going to +8, it goes to like +14, and then back to like -3. So it doesn't control it both ways, which I don't know how many people have done this, but if you really torque it, instead of getting a lot of range in the back end, as for slowing it down, you don't. It ends up giving you less range for slowing down and a lot more range for speeding up. So In Detroit, a lot of the ghetto tech DJs will actually torque that as much as they can so that they can play their records at like plus 14 or plus 15. It's a handy anecdote for you. So, now that we've disengaged this pitch fader, what we're going to do is we're going to have to flip this over so that we can take it apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this up. I'm just going to put it on my knee. And the best thing to do is if you have the original dust cover that came with your turntable, it's probably the best thing to sit your turntable in when you're doing this. Otherwise a milk crate works, and I think we used a milk crate in the last video because the turntable didn't have a dust cover. So now we are ready to start removing things. So make sure your wires are free so they can go through the holes when you take this rubber base off. And I usually like to start with the outer screws. These ones are really long. Now on some turntables, this screw assembly is 3 pieces and not 1. But back in the day, they used to build things correctly and, you know, just make 1 screw out of it. But nowadays, you have a screw, a washer, and you also have a steel rod that has a hole drilled through it, and that goes over top and sits in there. But this is all one unit, so it just sits in there and torques down and has a washer built into it. Now, I don't know why they didn't do that for the rest of the screws on this turntable, because the rest of them all have the washers. And don't lose the washers, because they help keep the rubber on and will actually help dampen the vibration. So this is the boring part where you take, you know, all 21 screws out of the bottom of the turntable case. Now, this one appears to still have parts of the hinges in place, and sometimes you have to remove those and sometimes you don't, but we'll see once we get all these screws off what happens, because the different models from the different years, what Technics did is they kind of streamlined production and started making decks with less parts. So they I don't even think the new turntables come with a dust cover, which of course you can go and buy from Technics at, you know, whatever they sell it for. I think I mentioned this in the other video, but one of these screws, whichever one is above the start-stop button, the screw does not go directly into the cabinet. It goes into the switch housing. So when you put the screw back in, please be careful and don't over-torque it, because you'll crack the housing, and eventually the switch will start to depress into the cabinet. So you have to be really careful when you do that. And these are things, you know, some of us learn along the way by trial and error, and some of us have just kind of noticed things and said, well, that would be a good idea if I didn't do that. When you're taking this off, this rubber base, just try and shimmy it along the sides. Don't pull up on it super hard right away, because there could be something under there that's caught on it. I have seen on some models of turntable, this pitch fader board is a little wider, and it gets caught on the side here, and when you go to lift it up, this whole thing just rips. And then you have to find a whole new board. Or if you're really handy with a glue gun, you can try and fix it yourself. So take care when you're doing this. It's not a race. And these hinges are actually attached to this part of the cabinet here, so I don't have to do anything with them. But sometimes I have seen some where they're actually attached to here via a clamp system with a series of bolts. And then it's a pain in the arse. So we'll put this away, and we're going to put these back together. Okay, so we're going to talk about this a little bit. I should probably turn this way, right? Well, I'm going to work on it this way, so I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, So this is the circuit board that the pitch fader is soldered to. This one has been worked on, I can tell, because I can see heat marks from solder on here, so I'm not sure if this one got taken apart and cleaned or what the deal is. I can also see that someone worked on the light at one point. So, before I take this apart, maybe we'll talk about how to calibrate this, because it's a fairly simple process, but you have to have the right tools. The first thing you're going to need is a digital multimeter. I got this one at the source probably 15 years ago. I think it cost me $50, and it's got a good range on it, and it works real good. Now you need a digital one. You can't use an analog one because you have to get this pitch potentiometer to exactly 2.7 k ohms. It has to be. That's what Technics in the service manual tells you, that this needs to be to have perfect pitch from +8 to -8. And since that's a nice comfortable range, that's what we're going to do. So in order to test it, you set your multimeter to 20K, so you have 2 decimal points. So can your camera see that? Anyway, what we're going to do is, you can see on the circuit board here there's 2 traces. There's this one here that has 2 pieces soldered to it, and then the other piece is over here. So if we put our contacts right here, we wouldn't get any reading. So what we're going to do is we're going to go like this. Something is supposed to happen. There we go. Now we can see that this one is pretty good. It's 2.72. It's supposed to be 2.70. Anywhere between 2.79 and 2.68 is acceptable, but I'm going to show you how to get it right to 2.70 because I don't know. That's what the manual says, and that's the way I like to do it. I find you get a really good tight mix if you do it the way the factory tells you to do it. Some people, again, like to mess with this, and it will give you a different range, but it won't be as accurate, because the further out you get, the harder it is to zero in. That's been my experience, because I have experimented with this quite a bit on my own turntables, and the result wasn't as good as when I had it set to the factory. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put a new fader in before we actually calibrate that, because every fader is slightly different, so you have to have it calibrated when the new fader's in. So what we're going to do is we're going to heat up the soldering iron or desoldering iron, and I'm going to show you how to take these off correctly without damaging the circuit board. And the way I like to do that is I like to leave this screwed on while I solder, for a couple of reasons, but the main one being it's not going to move around a whole lot when I'm soldering, and I don't have 3 hands, so it works a lot better. And then when you take this off, I'll show you how to take the screw off the bottom and get it out there without damaging the rest of the circuit board. This is a desoldering iron. If you're going to do this project, you paid a lot of money for your turntables, if you bought them new, or even if you bought them used off eBay. I mean, by the time you get them, to your house, you probably paid $500 or $600 for a pair. So do yourself a favor and get the right tools to do this. Like I said, a good jeweler's screwdriver set that has all the right bits, might cost you a maximum of, say, $25. Go out and buy one. Good wire strippers, $5 or $6 at any electronics shop. This is available at the source. If they don't have one in stock, they can order one for you. It is a desoldering iron. What this does is it sucks the solder up via a vacuum. That's what this bulb is. It's a vacuum. You can hear the air. And it makes it a lot easier to get the solder off these pins. There are 8 pins we have to desolder. So yeah, you can go out and buy a separate device that has a vacuum, and it works okay, but then you've got to, put the soldering iron right next to it and then get the thing lined up, and I find this works best. I've been using this for 10 years. and it works great. Every once in a while I have to replace the tip, but you can buy replacement tips at any reliable electronics shop. Here in St. John we have a place called Monroe Lighting, which has pretty much every piece of microelectronic stuff that you would ever want. So the other thing you need is a handy receptacle in which to I guess put the solder that you're taking off the board onto. So I live in Canada, and this is a Tim Hortons cup, and it seems to work pretty well for the job, because all of this will come off and it has to go somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead. The basic technique is pretty simple. There's a tiny hole in the end of this. It's really hot, so don't touch it. Basically what you want to do is you want to squeeze this all the way before you put the end of this on here, because if you squeeze it while it's on here, all of this solder will go through the circuit board and make a nice mess inside your turntable. So make sure that there's no solder in there if you have been soldering, and squeeze it. And basically you're going to just put this over top of this, and once it starts to melt, you just, there it goes. And then you just squeeze this, and you repeat the process until you get all of your points unsoldered. Now, there is another technique that I'll show you once we get all of these off, to make sure that the pitch fader will come off without having to pull it too hard. Let me go to the other side. Take your time when you're doing this. You know, it helps if you're not inebriated when you do this, because if you forget a step or you miss something and you put your turntable back together, you will kick yourself because you have to take it apart again. And there are just a lot of screws on these things. These turntables are built like Ford F-150 trucks from 1985. There's lots of room to maneuver inside the hood, but there's also a lot going on. So now, this side looks like it's pretty much desoldered, and there's still a little bit on this side. So what we do, well, I've learned what works really well. Because these pins are going through holes, there's wiggle room. The holes are not super tight. So what I like to do is I like to kind of just get this on the end of the pin and just kind of wiggle it with the heat on, and then I do that. And now I can actually see that I've got wiggle room now. So you want to do that with every single one of these, so that when you go to pull this off the circuit board, it comes off nice and easy. We don't damage anything. If you have to fight it, you've done it wrong. Repeat steps 1 and 2 over again, you know. Do not collect $200, go straight to jail. That kind of stuff. Yes. This is what's holding your turntable together. This lovely meltable liquid metal. I think I've just got one more to do. Okay, so I believe I have this desoldered. So I'm just going to leave that plugged in for a little while longer while I go to the next step, which is we have to pull this off, take the fader off, put another one in. So take note, actually on this side there's a ground wire that's attached to the metal plate that's holding the fader on. When you put this back together, make sure that that gets attached, because it will affect how much ground hum you have if you don't have that attached at the end of fixing your turntable. And these screws are a different color than the rest of the screws on the turntable. They're like a copper color, so they're pretty hard to lose. But make sure you put the right screws back in here, because if you put screws that are the wrong size, they either won't go in right, or they'll go in too easy and fall off when you're DJing, and then you'll lose your fader inside, and the music will stop, and everybody will want their money back. So, if you have a bad memory, take pictures. That's what the new phones are for. So, now we just have to give this a little pull. And there is a little piece of wire that's holding this on. So what you have to do is kind of poke your finger in here and just kind of give it a twist. It's a little hard to see, but basically it's like a twist tie. There we go, and it's screwed to the base, so that can go there and get tucked in there. So now we have the other side of your pitch fader. There's some rave goo right there. So you can see how dirty this thing gets. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a ton of dirt in there. So these can be cleaned, by the way, but we're just going to replace them. So there's two screws on the top here, and they hold this entire circuit board together, and they're actually anchored to the fader itself, this metal assembly here. And then there's this screw here, which attaches this little circuit board to the same assembly. So I like to take this one off first, because it's a little tricky to get off if you take the other two screws off first. And it's different from these two screws, so take note of what it is too. It's a little shorter. So again, if you're not good at memorizing things, then you can take pictures with your phone, or you can draw a picture. I've done that before. Oh, and this is real important. You see this little thing right here? This raises this up above the pitch fader. If you lose these and you try and put this back together, this shaft will stick up 1/4 of an inch too tall on here, and your pitch fader will ride up too high. So make sure that you hold on to these little things, because I haven't lost any, but I've played on decks where I know someone took them apart and didn't put them back together correctly, and they were amazed at how I knew why that was the way it was. And sometimes they're glued to this, and like that one, sometimes they're not. So we put it in our handy dandy device there, a Tupperware container. And then this, you kind of have to shimmy it, but it comes free. And this will not actually come off unless you unsolder this little green LED, but I don't feel like I want to do that, so yeah, there's a lot of goo in here. These are very well loved. So now you can see that I've got all these pins desoldered. So what I'll go ahead and try and do now, you can use any kind of screwdriver to do this, but this one's just about the right height. So I just stick that in there and I just kind of give it a little pull. And you can just kind of, there's one side. You can see how the pins are nice and straight. They came out real well. There's now holes on the other side. This side here, I'm noticing that there's some more solder here, so I'm going to go ahead and try and wiggle that free. It pays to take your time, because if you don't, you can damage things. There we go, look at that. I think I got that. Oh yeah, I saw that. Okay, so this is a moment of truth here. And very gently do this. Don't fight this. If you gotta push with a lot of force, you've done it completely wrong. So now I have in my hand the raison d'etre right there. This is and I mean, this will give you an idea of what kind of crap can get into your fader. I mean, I don't even know what that is. It's probably some kind of sugary drink that some booth bunny spilled in your turntable, but you know, that's all part of the game, I guess. Again, these can be cleaned. You can take them apart. You can clean the track. You can do all sorts of things with these to recondition them. But really, you know, if they're old enough, you can just go ahead and replace them, which is what we're gonna do. So this we put over here, and then we take one of these, and we're gonna solder it in there and repeat the process the reverse way. And yeah. So I have to heat the other soldering iron up, so that should take about 3 minutes. So now what we want to do is, now that we've desoldered our old gunky pitch fader, we're going to take our brand new pitch fader and we're going to install it on the circuit board, and we're going to test our turntable. So when I took this one apart, I noticed there was a whole pile of goo. You can see it here. It's very goopy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean that up, even though I don't think it'll affect the performance of the new pitch fader. Your deck is open, you might as well clean it. So take a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and we're just going to give it a little rub here. You know, we're going to clean this up. Just rub it gently, you know, it's not a... You don't want to damage anything while you're doing this. Also, rubbing alcohol is unbelievably flammable, so keep it well away from your soldering iron when you're doing this. So when I'm done with this, I'm just going to put it away, far out of my own reach. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to orientate this. Now there's only one way to do it, because the pins only go one way. As you can see, these ones are inside and these ones are outside. So if you look at your circuit board, you can say, alright, those ones are outside, those ones are inside. So you take the inside ones and well, the first thing you want to do is move this up and kind of put it in here like this, and just slide it in like that, and then this goes down there, and then you're gonna see that you've got your holes kind of lined up, so just push it in there gently so that they poke through. Try and do the other side at the same time, and make sure you get them to go all the way down. There's a little, here, I'll show you on this one. Look at the pins, okay? See how there's a skinny part and a fat part. The fat part is the part that rests against the circuit board. Make sure that that is resting against the circuit board, because if this is orientated any way, any other way than how it's supposed to be, this will rub against this part here and will make for not happy mixing. So be very, very, very careful. You know, do it right. So if you notice the one sticking up too far, maybe you have to melt the solder a bit to get in there. But this one looks like it's in there really nice. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this back together before we solder this, so that it's easier to solder. So the easiest way to do that is basically just put it flat like that. Now we have all our parts here. Now remember what I said. These are very important because they raise this up to the proper level. Make sure you got the right screws for this. Now the right screws are machine screws, meaning they have a very fine thread. They don't look like this. Okay, so make sure you use the right screws. There is one non-machine screw here. It's a little tiny one that goes on top of this pitch LED here. So we'll put all of the screws we need in a nice little pile. So this goes underneath like that. Alright. And just put your screw in. Find your hole. Now, the correct way to put a screw back into something is to reverse it, back it off until you get the thread going in correctly, because if you just try and force it in there, you may strip the threads of the hole or the screw itself. And don't over tighten that one right away. We're going to get both of these oriented really well. So just kind of lift that up and kind of put that in there. Now it's a little bit of a trick for the second one, but I just back this off a bit. Gives me some leeway to play with it. Because where this has to go is right underneath here. So, hey, it kind of helps if you got piano hands, but what you can do is stick your screwdriver in there and then move it over, kind of like that. It's a handy trick. And just move it over. Hey, get your screw in. Okay. You want them tight but not super torqued, because there are lock washers on this side of the screws, so when you get them in there they will apply pressure and they shouldn't come loose ever. Knock on wood. Now we put this screw back in, and all this one does is it keeps this LED from moving around. So we do the same thing. We kind of... You just want to back your screw off until you hear a little click, and then you know that it's going in straight. And then this one doesn't need to be torqued very much either, because it is a it's like a little plastic circuit board. You don't want to damage it. So now we have this in here, and we make sure that all of our pins are sticking up where they're supposed to. And what we can do now is poke this through this hole. Make sure it goes all the way in. Now, so now this is on there. What I like to do when I'm soldering this back on, I'll put one screw in just to keep it on there so that it won't move when I'm soldering. There we go. And I also like to check. Just lift the turntable up and see if the fader's rubbing. This one feels pretty good, so I think it's alright. So, we're going to go ahead and solder. Soldering is pretty much just as easy as desoldering. What you want to do is you want to heat up the pin that the solder is going to stick to. So basically just take the tip and push it on the pin, and then apply a little bit of solder. Let it go. And that's basically it. Make sure that the solder covers the whole solder point here. You can see they're about probably, I don't know, 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter. You don't want to put too much solder on, but don't put too little on either. So you just heat your pin up, and the pin will take the solder. Don't push the solder on the pin, let the pin take it. Same with wire. If you're soldering wire, let the wire suck the solder up when you're doing it, because that way you know that you've got a good solid connection. And this doesn't take very long, but take your time. Again, it's not a race. And if you're soldering something where your pins are close together, like say I was going to resolder this here, you don't want to put too much solder on, because what can happen is you can end up with solder kind of joining together, and you end up with these little jelly beans of solder, and then you don't know what you're doing to your circuit, because you could arc something and wreck your turntable, and then you have to do it all over again. So be very, very slow with it. You can always add more. But basically you want the solder to cover the whole point
and make a nice little kind of like a little volcano kind of shape here. You want to make sure the pin has enough solder, but isn't isn't a bubble. You want to make sure that the solder goes all the way around the pin too. If it doesn't, it can come loose or it can vibrate and cause hum issues. So now I have replaced my pitch fader. So what we're going to do now, first thing to do, if you're not going to solder for a little while, unplug your soldering iron, because well, you don't want to accidentally burn yourself. And actually, where I like to store mine is on top of the stove, because it's a nice spot to just stick it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put our pitch fader back on, and we've already got it mostly on, but now this is something you should pay attention to. I said earlier there's a little piece of wire here that's got a metal loop on the end of it. That's your ground. So what you want to do is you want to, now see this? This is a magnetized bit. When you buy your screwdrivers, make sure they have magnetized bits, because it makes this a lot easier. I can just orientate this, and I'm good, just like that. Okay, again, I'm gonna check. I don't hear any rubbing, and it feels nice and smooth. So now what I'm gonna go ahead and do is just give this a little bit more of a tighten, but don't over torque it. Again, it's an aluminum cabinet, but I've seen them crack. So that's in there good. It's nice and solid. Check it. Make sure it's not vibrating. Make sure there's nothing left in here. You didn't leave your lotto ticket or your bread tag or anything in here. You never know what you're gonna find when you open up one of these things. Alright, so now that we have our pitch fader installed and we're happy with our soldering job, the next thing to do is to calibrate the fader. There's two ways to do this. One is underneath this circuit board, and the other is underneath the platter cover. We're going to deal with this one first because it's the harder one to get at. And we have the turntable open already. Now, again, buy yourself one of these. It's got to be digital. Set it to 20K. And if you buy one of these, if you spent $60 on a multimeter, go out every year and spend $5 on a new battery for it, because if you leave it in your toolbox for 2 or 3 years and don't use it or whatever, the battery can leak and then you don't have a nice piece of equipment anymore. And it's just good maintenance just to replace your battery every year. Get a good copper top. That's what I use. So what we're looking for here is 2.7 k ohms. That's what it wants. And we did measure this earlier, and it was at 2.73, I believe, and now it's at 2.59. So every fader is different, and I did mention this earlier. So what we're going to do, what's happening there is I'm losing contact. I kind of have to get it in there real good. Okay, there we go. So once I have a good strong reading, it's 2.6. So what we're going to do now, we're going to get a different bit on this screwdriver, because inside here is a little tiny pitch pot, and it's actually a star head. So there's a Phillips head on there. Now, do not push very hard on this when you're doing this, okay? You're going to notice, and you may not even need the whole screwdriver for this. You just pop this in there, and it moves. And this one, actually, sometimes you might need a different screwdriver. I have a jeweler screwdriver that works really good for this. So what I have here is a little jeweler screwdriver that has a the end spins, and this is really good for doing this kind of work, because you can kind of just hold this above here and move this as you need it. So what I do is I go in here, and you'll be able to feel it. It's just in there. It'll kind of click in. Don't push down on it. You don't need to. You just hold it, kind of orientate it, and then just kind of give it a tiny little nudge, and you'll be able to feel it go. And then we're going to see where we're at. at 2.62. So I moved it a little bit ahead. So what we can go ahead is, now I'm moving this in a counterclockwise direction right now. Seems to be the direction that is increasing it. It may be different on some. Alright, 2.67, so we're almost there. So, tiny bit. It may take you a while if you haven't done this before, but it's worth it. Oh man, this is like bingo. You're one number off. And some of these are more sensitive than others. You'll find that when you nudge it, you get a lot more range. Sometimes you don't get hardly any. See, I got 2.74 there, so I just got to back it off a hair, and I should be where I want to be. 2.68. Again, it's kind of like, sometimes you'll push it and you don't think it's moved anywhere and it goes just a hair. Ah, you see that? No, it was there. Okay, that, my friends, is a perfectly calibrated Technics pitch fader. It took me about 3 minutes. It could take you an hour. Be patient with it. If you get frustrated, go make a sandwich and come back. So we are totally done with the underside of this turntable now. So what you want to do is get the right bit out that you're going to use to put your turntable back together. Again, go through your turntable, give some screws a tightening. You never know what could be loose. That one was loose. That one was a little bit loose. Give it a tap. If you hear anything, tighten some screws up. Okay, so to put this back together, basically what I like to do is I just kind of put it on my lap. And take this base and there's two holes, one for the AC cord. It's an oval shape. Feed the cord as far through as you can, and then the round hole in the corner is for the RCA cords, so feed them in, and the ground wire, which I haven't removed off these turntables yet, but I may still do that. Now, I'm not actually going to screw this down right away because I want to test this and make sure that my pitch is working. So, dust cover can go over here. This is nice. Okay, so piece of felt, and a little knob. Very smooth. Okay, so again, this gets plugged into here. Note the orientation. There's 3 prongs on one side, one on the other. Make sure the corresponding holes go in there. Okay. Give it a little look, see if there's anything loose in there. You don't want any screws hiding around in there, getting into the motor. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm not going to screw this down. I'm just going to put this on here, just so no wires get rubbing up against the platter. And I'm going to put this on. Now here's one very important thing. If you have a turntable, direct drive like this, where the magnet is attached to the platter, there are other turntables that have this, but mostly it's Technics ones. Do not plug this turntable in with the platter off, and don't ever turn your turntable on with the turntable plugged in and the platter off, because this is designed to feed back against this, and if it has nothing to feed back against, it's going to burn the motor right out. So always, and be very careful when you put your platter on, and then make sure it spins nice and free. So now I'm going to plug it in, turn it on. I'm just making sure it's working. Now on this particular model of pitch fader that we bought, it already has what's called the central bypass circuit disabled within the fader. So on one of the tracks, there's supposed to be a connection made when it gets to the middle to turn this light on. And what that does is it locks the turntable at exactly 33 1/3. But on this particular one, it doesn't have that. The light is not coming on. So if you do go out and buy your Technics MKII faders, which I think is what we ordered. Originally what we were going to do is we were going to order MK2 faders and modify them. And I'll still show you how to do that very quickly, or I'll just show you how to do it. So right now basically I can put this turntable back together, you know, make sure it works on 45, 33, start, stop, all that kind of stuff. And then I can show you how to calibrate it under here as well. So right now the fader works, everything's going well, there's no weird wavering, everything seems to be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my turntable, I'm going to unplug it before I take the platter off. Remember that, people, you want a happy turntable, not a frustrated one. So now what are we going to do here? This is your pitch gain knob, okay? So what I like to do, I'm just going to make sure that there's no wires coming straight up or anything like that. I don't want the platter, underside of the platter to catch anything. When you're doing this, the main reason to do something like this, aside from general maintenance, if your pitch fader needs to be replaced, I mean, if you're playing and all of a sudden your platter starts to waver, or you notice that you're not getting the mixes you used to, and your decks are 5 or 6 or maybe even 10 years old, it's time to replace your pitch fader. So you can go out and buy new ones and do this. Now the reason for this modification, and I'm going to show you, there's one other step that you have to do if you want to do this correctly with these MK2 faders. These ones you don't. I mean, like you know, they don't trigger the central bypass circuit. They don't trigger the lock. So we're essentially done. But what's happening here? When you're mixing and it gets locked on, what ends up happening is you lose that pitch range, and you actually lose it about 1/4 of an inch. So there's a whole bunch of pitch right there that you can't use when that light's on. And when the light goes off, then it starts to slow down. When the light goes on this way, speeding up, the platter spins faster. But it'll only do that when the light goes off. And that little bypass circuit has a little tiny bit of a track that it has to go through. And it's about this far. You know, it's about probably 1/4 of an inch, so about 1/8 of an inch each way. You lose that pitch. So basically by doing this modification, you are extending the pitch range, making it a lot easier to groove ride.
So what you're saying is on one that has not been modified, you can have 0.
Yep.
And you can have maybe plus 0.2 and upwards, but you can't have that little tiny bit between 0 and plus 0.2.
Exactly. So
and the same on the negative side.
if you start your set off at 125, and all your records are really similar in pitch, and you're near the 0 point, you're going to have a hard time mixing, because you're not going to go much further than this when you're mixing. You're just not. Now if your records are a little faster and more dynamic in range, say your records go from 125 to 135 throughout your whole set, but you're playing at like 128, then you're going to be up in here somewhere. So that's not so bad. But if you know your records really well, and you like playing them at their proper pitch as much as possible, then this is where you're going to live. So it's in your best interest to do this modification. Also, it just makes mixing that much more fun. It's a little easier to groove ride. You don't have that click. It kind of screws you up. You know, it's like a speed bump. So this basically just makes your mixing smoother. A lot of DJs don't touch their platter when they're mixing. They just kind of play with the groove ride. You know, if you're doing the sneak style or whatever, and it's a lot easier to mix. So that's why you do it. So when you do this, you know, pay attention to what I've said. I'm also there's also going to be some websites that we'll put down, you know, below the video that we'll post, showing you where I got this information, because I didn't make this stuff up. You know, I learned it from somebody else. Yeah, so that's basically it. Have fun with your turntables. If you own a pair of these, try and keep them in good order. They're no longer made anymore. They're wonderful to have in your home. If you're lucky enough to live in a city where they have a pair of these in a club, then you know what it's like to play on them. If you've been playing for more than 10 years, then you know what it's like to be playing on them. Anyway, that's basically all I have to say about it. Take your time with it. Get the right tools, as I said. And just have fun with your DJing, because that's what it's all about. Alright, so I'm going to put this back together. So this cover goes on here. It only goes one way. There's a little notch here and a little raised bump here. There's also a raised part here. So there's little screws that go in here. They're only one size, and there's 5 of them. So again, take pictures if you have to. These go in here. Don't over torque them. You don't need to. And if they don't seem to go in right away when you start rotating them, try backing them off till you hear a click, and then you know that you've got them in the right way. Now, a handy little trick I like to do to my turntables is I like to go out and get a 3/8 drill. Not while this is attached to this, mind you, but there are the 2 points where those 2 little pitch pots are, the pitch and the break. I like to drill a hole right above them, so that when I want to do maintenance on my turntables, I don't have to take that cover off. So that's probably something I might end up doing to these ones. But it's just a handy little thing I like to do. Some people don't like to mess with their turntables so much, but I find it's better than taking this off every time. And I think the newer turntables actually have a hole right there. Okay, so that's on. Everything's good. We'll remove these bits that we don't want flying around when we go to put the bass back on. Dust couvert. Okay, so if you do this modification and you don't buy these and you want to take these and make a MK3 or MK5 fader, you can do that. It is fully possible, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to shimmy this off. Actually, I'll just put it down there for now. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to show you, first of all, how to take this ball out of here. Now you might think, okay, you're going to take apart the pitch fader. Yes, we're going to take apart the pitch fader. So what I like to do, you can either use a tiny little screwdriver to do this, which sometimes works really well, if I have the right size. And I think I do. Yeah, that's going to work. You have to be able to get the screwdriver underneath this pin, or it's not going to work correctly. And you need a pair of pliers to do this. Now, this is why you need a marker. When you do this, please put the fader back together correctly. It does make a difference. So I like to take a marker and just put a mark on the bottom of the circuit board and on the side of this. That way I know where I'm going and how to get back to where I'm to, because I don't have GPS. So there are 10 pins that hold this fader together. We're going to bend all of them straight up so that this fader track will come out, and then we can take this fader slider off and remove the ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very carefully pry this and just get them up. I don't need to go all the way because I'm going to do the rest with the pliers. I'm also going to show you how to put this back together because I'm going to do that as well. Again, don't fight these too much. And this modification has a shelf life. If you want to put your fader back together and say you want to clean it sometime or do something, you can really only bend these pins about 3 times before they will break right off. So if you've gotten to that point where you've got to clean your fader a 3rd time, like say your decks are 15 years old, go out and buy new faders, because this is just trying to get this circuit board on with half the pins or some of the pins doesn't work right, because this has to slide on a track, and if this is loose, it's going to lose contact of the track, and when you're mixing, you're all of a sudden going to be at a different pitch, and again, everybody's going to want their money back. So go out and buy the faders. So what I'm doing now is I'm bending these completely straight up. You see that? Straight up. Right now they're kind of half bent. So I'm just taking my time here and bending them. And don't bend them too fast either. Metal fatigue. Remember that from shop class. Metal will break. Well, it'll heat up and then it will snap and bend, and you're not going to be a happy camper. So, slow and steady. It's not a race. By the way, putting this back together is a lot easier than taking it apart. Also, be careful when you're near these pins. You don't want to bend them. You don't want to break them off. You don't want to have to try and wire jump a solder point onto your board after you've broken it off. So I have these all bent. Again, I took a little marker. I made a mark of where they're supposed to be, because if I want to put this back together, I want to be able to do it correctly. Because if I don't, your pitch will end up being wrong. Okay, so very carefully. Now, that's your fader track. Look how dirty that is. Now the little ball that's in here is in a little hole on the side of this. What I'm going to do, I may want to put this back together someday, so I don't want to lose that ball. And there's a little spring in there, so as soon as I pull this out, that ball is going to go flying along with the spring. So now, notice I didn't even take it out. I could take it out if I wanted to, but you don't really need to. Also, if you clean these things, do not clean the underside of this here, okay? This part has grease on it. It's very, very good for the fader. It helps it slide. It gives it a nice resistance. This is the part that you want to clean, okay? I might as well clean it while I have it open. So, where is that cloth I had? Now I just use regular rubbing alcohol to do this because it's gets rid of the gunk really fast and evaporates good. So basically, I just take it. You can use whatever you want to clean this with, but this stuff works really good. Do you see how dirty this is? That's 10 years of rave goo. So you just kind of give it a little bit of a dry off there. And it's rubbing alcohol, so it'll dry on its own. We'll just leave it alone for 10 or 15 seconds or whatever. And I don't have my soldering irons on, so I don't have to worry about rubbing alcohol catching on fire. Now, these pins can be dirty sometimes too, so you can either just blow on them, or actually what I like to do, you know, I should be more prepared here. I should make sure I have my things at my fingertips, but all I need is a Q-tip. Okay, so again, I take a little bit of rubbing alcohol, or you can use whatever you want, but I like rubbing alcohol. Get the Q-tip saturated, because all we're trying to do is just remove the gunk from these little prongs here. So all I'm doing, and I'm not pressing especially hard on this either. This is, because you don't want to bend these. So I'm just getting rid of the dust and the crap. Okay, so Now they're clean. I'll just let them dry for a few seconds. Now we're going to put this back together because we've taken the spring and the ball out. And as you can see in here, you see this little white spot? That's the central circuit. So when this fader goes in the middle, it contacts those two, and there's a yellow and orange wire that are attached to here, and that's what operates the green light that triggers the turntable to lock at 33. The new fader, it has just a plain black track all the way across. That's what's inside that new fader. There's no central circuit in there. So now I take a look at my orientation. I have my black mark on this side and I have it on this side, because if I do this, guess what? It's not going to work. So I make sure that this is on there. There's no holes. It's not bent. And the easiest way to do this, to put this back on, is basically to take your screwdriver. Actually, I'm going to take a wider one because it's a lot easier and it's a little more stable. Only takes a few seconds to do it correctly. So basically, I just hold it in my hand. I take this and I just bend the pin. I just bend it slowly down all the way. Just like that. So you see how the pin is now nice and snug to here? We're going to do that to all of these. So basically we just move that out of our way. We're just going to bend them all. Be careful when you're near the contacts that are going to get soldered if you're going to put this back in. So this is something that you can do even if you don't buy new pitch faders. You can take your pitch fader apart, you can clean it once, you can modify it, and then you can have a whole new DJing experience. You can say, hey, I did it myself. I didn't pay some guy $175 to do it, because if you ask me to do this and I don't know who you are and you want it done, I'm going to charge you probably $80 to $90 per turntable to do something like this. But it's really not that hard to do it yourself. So now I've got all my pins bent. That circuit board is nice and give it a little shake. Make sure it's not loose. And then check it out. Nice and smooth. So now we've changed this from this to this. Now there's one other step that you would have to take if you wanted to disable the bypass, because even by doing this, just by taking that ball out, you're not disengaging the bypass. So there's a yellow and an orange wire. They're right here. Okay, so they're on here and here. You can either desolder them from this circuit board and then wrap tape around the ends so they never touch. Put them back in and you're done. That light will never come on. Or you can cut them, but desoldering them is much better because you can put them back on if you so wish. Very easy to reverse the process. None of this is permanent damage, okay? It's just modifying, and then if you want to sell your turntables to somebody and they want them stock, you say, okay, I resoldered these two wires. And I was a smart person, I kept my spring and my little ball. Put your pitch fader back together. Bob's your uncle. But most of the time people are going to say, oh wow, these are really cool because they're modified and I like the way they work. So that's what you would do. You would desolder the yellow and the orange wire, tape them up, make sure they don't touch, because if they do touch, guess what happens? The little green light goes on forever. Okay, so that's basically it. We can go ahead and put this back together now because we're done with it.